Welcome to Highline Excel 2016 video number 9. Hey, if you want to download this Excel workbook, Business 218 video 9, or the PDF files, click on the link below the video. Hey, in this video, we got to talk about date functions and date formulas. Here are a number of date functions that we will see and date math. Well, we've already done a lot of date math in this class. And from our study of number formatting, we know that when we enter a date like 8/21/2013, even though we can click in the cell and look up in the formula bar and see a number and a forward slash, if we were to wipe away the number formatting, notice up here in the number group it says date. If we wipe it away and apply general or use the keyboard Control-Shift grave accent tilde, that is the number of days since December 31st, 1899. That is a serial number that underlies every date. If we did not have a serial number under the date, then we couldn't do date math or use any of these amazing functions to create the dates we want. Control-Z. Let's just remind ourselves about date math. Here's our invoice due date. Here is today. And number of days late, we simply say, hey, equals later date minus earlier date. Because we have serial numbers under here and this date is further through history, bigger number minus smaller number. When I hit enter, I get 5 days late. If I want to figure out project start, project end, and what is the number of days for this project, I have to take, well, the later date minus the earlier date. But this is different because I need to include the start date. So I always add 1 and enter. So that's 6 days for this project. For loans, there's no problem. We can take the loan issue date and add the number of days for this loan. And then the maturity date, when I hit enter, is 3/1/2016. Now, the main point of this video is to talk about different date functions. Now, if you need today's date not hard-coded for historical transactions, but you want a formula that will always update. So when I open this workbook tomorrow, the date will change to today's date. We use the today function. Now, today and now function, they're argumentless functions. Notice there's no arguments in the screen tip, so I simply close parentheses and enter. That will be 5/11 when I open this tomorrow. Now, the now function is an argumentless function also, but it will give us today's date and the time. Now, these are volatile functions, so every time you do something, it will recalculate. For example, if I come down here and put this cell into edit mode and hit enter, you notice that that instantly updated. Now, I see that this label right here is actually in the wrong place. Now, we want to go and look at a great function called EOMONTH. Now, we've already done this function, but this is a video about date functions. So here's our invoice due date, and it says that the amount is due at the end of the month. So we can simply get EOMONTH. It needs the start date, comma, and as we've seen before, if I want the end of this month, I put 0. If I want the end of last month, I put -1. If I want the end of next month, I put a 1. Now, I'm going to put a 0 because the invoice contract says the due date is at the end of this month. Now, the great thing about this function and any of the date functions is they know leap year. So if the invoice date is 2/2/2016, look at that. It knows leap year. Another important function is EDATE, and it's often used in invoicing and human resource departments. Here's our invoice date, and the contract says that the invoice amount is due next month. Now, the problem with exactly next month, meaning 12/7/2015, is I can't just have a formula like add 30, because it's not always 30 days to get to the same day next month. So luckily, they have the EDATE. I simply put in the start date, comma, and it's the same. Now, it would be silly to put 0 because that would give me 11/7. But I can go backwards, and I can go forward. For this particular invoice contract, it says same day as the invoice date, but next month is when this invoice is due. So EDATE 1, and that gives me 12/7/2015. We can also use EDATE if we have a hire date and number of years until the pension vests. We need to use EDATE to go 5 years into the future and get whatever 5 years. That would be 11/7/2019. Now, for a single cell, I mean, we could look at this and add 5 to the 4. But imagine if you had an entire data set of employees, all with a hire date. Then this formula equals EDATE. We can simply put in the hire date for the first employee, comma, wait a second, this says months? We're given years? How are we going to do that? No problem. I say 5 years times, and I'm going to hard code 12 in because 12 is not going to change. And there you go. That formula could be entered into the top of the human resource data set and copied all the way down, and instantly every single employee has a vest date. Now, we've already seen the date function. We used left, mid, and right in our last video when we were talking about text functions. But the date function, of course, is a date function. You give it the year, the month, the day, and instantly it will spit out a serial number date. Now we want to go down and talk about year, month, and day functions and a few other important functions. Now, here's a data set. And almost always we're given transactional dates. And we need to do things with those dates like figure out what the year is, the month, the day, the month name, the day name, the quarter. These are all helper columns that allow us to do our data analysis later. For example, we might need to add sales, and our criteria is going to be an actual day name. Similarly, we might have to summarize by year. We can't just point our SUMIFS or COUNTIFS formulas to a daily date because our criteria is going to be year. No problem. We'll base our formula off the year column. Similarly, look at this. What if we're given quarter 1, 2016 all the way to quarter 4, 2017? We're actually going to have to create a helper column with exactly those labels. So every single historical daily date will have the right quarter label. So we can use this column as a helper column to summarize for our report. Not only that, but we'll also see fiscal quarter. All right, let's start off with the year, month, and day function. Equals year. They named this function smartly. And notice the screen tip says serial number. I simply click on my date, and year will know what to do. Control-Enter, double-click, and send it down. All the way down, we can see we have the actual year. Now, if we need to summarize by year and our criteria is an actual year, we can do it. Equals SUMIFS. And in the sum range, I highlight sales, Control-Shift down arrow F4, comma. And now in the criteria range, I have a helper column. Control-Shift down arrow F4. That helper column has all of the years. So when I type comma, and now I give it the criteria year, that formula will work. Close parentheses, Control-Enter, and copy it down. I could use the keyboard shortcut Control-Shift-4 to add currency number formatting. Now, sometimes we need month. Now, the month function will actually give us 1 for January, 2 for February, equals month, serial number. I simply click on the date, Control-Enter, double-click, and send it down. We can do the day equals, and they named this one smartly too, the day. And there it is, serial number. I click on the date, Control-Enter, double-click, and send it down. Now, sometimes we need the actual month number. Sometimes we need the actual day number. But what if we need the month name, January, February, March, or the day name? Now, last video we learned about text functions, and that is the solution here, text. We give it the value. Hey, we know that a number underlies a date. That's what text does. It takes a number, comma, and if we know the custom number formatting in double quotes, it will take that number and convert it to text. Now, what do we want? We want month name. Well, MMMM is the custom number format to show the month name from a serial number. End double quote, close parentheses. Control-Enter. That is amazing. From that serial number, now we have text that represents the month name. Double-click and send it down, and there we go. Similar to month name, sometimes we need day name. value, hey, there it is. That's a date, comma, and just like month, in double quotes, we put D, 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 D. 4 Ds will create the actual text day name from a serial number date. End double quote, close parentheses, Control Enter, double click and send it down. Now, sometimes we need to know something like this. Which weekday over the last 2 years had the biggest sales? Well, now we can do it. If our criteria input is a text day name, we can simply use equals SUMIFS. And in the sum range, we're putting sales. Control-Shift down arrow F4, comma. Criteria range, there is our helper column for day. Control-Shift down arrow F4, comma. And now we can use our text day name as criteria. Close parentheses, Control Enter, Control-Shift 4 for currency number format. Double click and send it down. Wow, look at that. So it's Tuesday with the biggest sales over the last 2 years. Now, our next topic in relation to dates is how do we calculate quarter? Because sometimes we need a helper column that lists a quarter. Not only that, but sometimes we need to have a column that tells us what the fiscal quarter is. Now, let's start with quarter. Well, the first 3 months would be quarter 1. So anytime we see 1, 2, 3, we need in this column a 1. Then when we go from 4 all the way to 7, we need a 2 for second quarter, and so on. Now, there's a bunch of different formulas you can use to calculate quarter. The one I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take the month, and since 3 months determines a quarter, I'm going to take the actual month as a relative cell reference and divide it by 3. Control Enter, double click and send it down. Well, let's just see if we can notice a pattern here. Anytime it's quarter 1, these numbers show up as 1 or less. Anytime it's quarter 2, it's 2 or less all the way to 1, and so on. Well, we can actually take this number, and if we had the ability to round up to the integer, we would convert all of these numbers to 1 and all of these numbers to 2. Well, we've seen the round function a number of times, but guess what? There's a round up function, and round up is exactly what we want. We want to take all of these numbers, which are always going to be 1 to 0.333, 2 to 1.333. We always want to take that actual calculation right there and round it to the integer. Now, just like our earlier round functions, if we want to round to the integer, number of digits has to be 0. And that formula right there will calculate our quarter. When I double click and send it down, every single time it rounded up to the integer. And you can see all the way down that works. Now, we need to create a label just like this label up here so we can use this helper column to summarize. All right, you ready? Equals, and in double quotes, we need capital Q, and then we join it to our quarter we just calculated, and then join it in double quotes, space, dash, space, and double quotes, and we join that to our year. There you go. We're joining a Q, the quarter, a space, dash, space, and the year. Control Enter, double click, and send it down. That works all the way down. That is pretty cool. Now we can come up here and create our SUMIFS to summarize in the sum range the sales. Control-Shift down on F4, comma, the criteria range. That is our new helper column. Control-Shift down arrow, F4, and now comma, our criteria 1. That is our label. Control-Enter, double-click, and send it down. Go to the last cell, F2. That is looking good. Now, we need to scroll down, and we need to actually talk about what a fiscal quarter is. Now, fiscal quarter just means that a company can choose any 3-month period as their first quarter. And the way that they decide is whichever the slowest period in the year is for their company or their industry, they choose that as the 4th quarter because that gives them more time to prepare their taxes and financial statement. Now, for our fiscal quarter, we're going to define the actual first quarter as the 4th quarter. The second quarter will become the first quarter. Now what that means is we need a formula that will deliver when it sees month 1 to 3, a 4, when it sees 4 to 7, a 1, and so on. Now, we're going to see two different ways to do this formula. Now, the way I like to do it is I like to use VLOOKUP. And the VLOOKUP solution will be a little bit easier than our alternative. But the alternative formula has a very specific use. All right, so let's think about this. Oh, VLOOKUP. If we were going to look up the month number, 1, 2, or 3, if we use VLOOKUP here with our month as the lookup, the first column can be sorted smallest to biggest. 1, 2, 3 will tell VLOOKUP to get the fourth quarter from the second column of the lookup table. 4, 5, 6 will get a 1. 7, 8, 9 will get a 2. 10, 11, 12 will get a 3. So I like to use the VLOOKUP. The lookup value right here is going to be our month number, comma, the table, that's this. Remember, it's going to try to make an approximate match in the first column. We have to F4 because we're copying this formula down. We need that table locked, comma, column index, 1, 2. The second column in the lookup table has the thing we want to go and get and bring back to the cell. So I simply type a 2 here. The default for VLOOKUP is approximate match, so I do not need to put that argument in. Close parentheses, Control, Enter, double click, and send it down. And look at that, all the way down. Yes, when it gets to April, all the way to June, it's going to report quarter 1. January, all the way to March, that's going to get quarter 4. Now, there is another way to do this. Actually, there are many ways to do this. Couple weeks ahead, we're going to learn how to create formulas in the data model. And there's no approximate match lookup formula in the data model. So no problem. We're going to use the if function. And all we're going to say is, hey, when the month is less than 4, we're going to put a 4. So let's try this. Equals if, and our logical test that comes out true or false. We're always going to look at the month, and we're going to ask the question, are you less than 4? If that's true, which means month 3, 2, 1, what do we want? We need a 4. Otherwise, we need to take the quarter. Remember, 2 should be 1, 3 should be 2, and so on. So I'm simply going to take the quarter, which I've already calculated here, and subtract 1. Close parentheses, Control, Enter, double click, and send it down. Now, oftentimes you don't actually have the standard quarter inside your table like this. So that would mean instead of that cell reference looking at the standard quarter, which was already calculated, we would actually have to calculate it here. Round up, and we take the actual month number, divide it by 3. We have to round it to the integer, so we put a 0, close parentheses. So in this value, if false, we took the actual round up. That calculates the standard quarter, and then we subtracted a 1. Control, Enter. Double click and send it down. Now, you would actually have to have a completely different construction if your company had a different fiscal quarter than January, February, March equals 4. That's why I like to use the VLOOKUP, because then we can put whatever months here and whatever quarters here. But again, later in the data model, we'll actually have to do a formula like this. All right, now we have our fiscal quarter. Now, guess what? Since this is reporting for financial statements, when it says fourth quarter, this actually has to be attached to last year. So unlike when we did a standard quarter and quarter 1 was 2016, this fourth quarter has to have the year from last year, which means 2015. So we're going to have to do a similar formula for fiscal year. Equals if the month, logical test, is less than 4, then what do we want? We want to take the year, 2016, minus 1. Otherwise, the value of false is the actual year. Now I can close parentheses, Control, Enter, double click, and send it down. And there we go. Now, when we create our fiscal quarter label, I'm going to do it a different way because later we're going to actually have to use these formulas in our data model to calculate fiscal year and our fiscal quarter. And we're going to use pivot tables from the data model formulas. And when we drop a field into the row area, it sorts. So notice if I choose to put the year and then the quarter, this will automatically always sort correctly. Over here, if I sorted this, Q1 and Q1 would be together. So actually, sometimes this is very much the preferable label for quarter. All right, that's no problem. Equals, there's the year, and I join it to with the ampersand in double quotes, space, dash, space, Q, and double quotes, ampersand, and there's my fiscal quarter. Control, Enter. Double click and send it down. Now we have our label that we can calculate our SUMIFS and add the sales for each fiscal quarter equals SUMIFS. The sum range, that's going to be our sales. Control Shift down arrow F4. Comma. We get to our criteria range. That's our new helper column. Control Shift down arrow F4. Comma. And the criteria, that is our label. Control Enter. Double click and send it down. Well, of course, we're going to get the same numbers if we had the actual same months, but here we have our different labels. All right, so in this video, we talked about a very important topic, date formulas and date functions. And for a data set with daily transactional dates, we oftentimes need helper columns that allow us to summarize sales or revenue or expenses for certain reports based on year, month, day, the month name, the day name, quarters, or even fiscal quarters and fiscal years. We also saw EDATE, EOMONTH, today, now, and reminded ourselves about date math. All right, next video, we're going to talk about data validation, and then we'll jump into lookup functions. All right, we'll see you next video.